Hello everyone, hi friends, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm going to create a special live event and what I'm going to do today is not teaching you something. I will simply work together with you. I'm writing the second edition of my Spring Security in Action. Most of you probably know, and today I'm going to just start writing chapter 13, which is the introduction to OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. Following this chapter, there will be other specific chapters for all the roles in OAuth 2, like the authorization server, resource server, client. Today I'm going to do this together with you. Now, I have no idea how long will this take, because I'm usually not able to work on a chapter for more than 2-3 hours in a row. It's a very complex, exhausting activity. So I don't promise on how long we'll stay here today together, but I will do this as much as I can. And as you can see, I just have the template. Oh, you can't see. I'm going to share my screen. So I just have my template started. It's only the chapter number and the title. Anything can change, and we are going to write it from scratch, including figures. I don't expect to have code in this chapter because it's an introduction chapter to OAuth 2, and the code will be when we actually implement the authorization server and the resource server in the next in the next chapters. But whatever it takes together, we'll simply write together. And what I'm also going to do is, from time to time, I think I have about 3 codes that I would like to share with you. So first of all is a discount code for any mailing product, and I just put it in the chat right now. And secondly, I will start with a free ebook voucher for my Spring Security in Action second edition that you can use. Be very attentive. All the 100% discounts are one use only, so the first of you manages to get the ebook will get the ebook. The others will not be able to use the discount code anymore. Okay, so this is the first one I'm sharing with you, and let's see who's the lucky one to get it. Later throughout this live event, I will share more codes. Please leave your questions, work with me. We can't have a bilateral conversation, but you can write me in the live chat. I will keep an eye on the live chat, and I'm just going to work and try to write this chapter. One of the things that of course you have to understand is that when you write a book, you have several iterations over a chapter, including by other people, like the copy editor, the development editor, the technical editor, the proofwriter. So what I will write here is definitely not the last shape which will be printed. There will be other iterations over the text, but writing the first draft is actually the first step in writing a chapter in a book. So what we are going today to do is the first step of writing a chapter of a technical book, writing the first draft. The first draft, which later will be reviewed by several editors and again by me several times, but it's still the starting point. Okay, so let's see what can we start with. So I would say, first of all, what the chapter covers. So I need to figure out in like 3, maximum 4 bullets usually, which is which are the main aspects that I will cover, and usually they should be actions the reader will be able to do after reading the chapter. So they should be named with verbs representing the skills that will be gathered by the reader after reading the chapter. So this is a bit difficult for this kind of chapter because, as I said, even if it's an in-action book, I can't just simply start with the implementation of the authorization server before I discuss the very basics, because otherwise there will be a large gap and then the reader would not understand. You always assume a reader starting from some prerequisites, but you need to fill all the gaps, otherwise people would not understand and they will feel them frustrated with reading the book because they will not be able to apply what you write there, and that's difficult in the end to achieve. But the main secret is you cover everything, you try to be as much detail as possible, and sometimes even repetition is very important. So in many cases reviewers, because they are reviewers, usually they are thinking as reviewers, they say, oh, there is too much repetition in the book, why do you repeat that in a figure and you repeat it in the paragraph as well? But in reality, if you make some statistics, you'll see that throughout the readers, like the real readers, not the reviewers, it usually makes a lot of sense, because some people are more attracted to figures, others are more attracted to the paragraphs themselves. So it depends how our brain is built, and our brains are built differently, even if we are all human. And that's one of the other points that make things different and difficult. My mic is too sensitive, it might be. So let me try to put it a little bit less sensitive. So I'm not sure if that makes now things a bit better. Maybe a bit better now. I also tend to speak very loudly, so it might be also because of that. If I have my mic in front of me here and I speak very loudly, sorry for that. So I hope it's better now. Let me know in the live chat if the sound problems are solved. Like if you still feel that it's too sensitive or too loud, I try to put it a little bit lower. So with that being said, can I start actually with this first bullet? So I will say that the reader would definitely understand what a token is. So my purpose is to make them understand what a token is. Then I would like to make them understand the roles of the specification and how each of the roles work. So the grant types is also something that I will discuss here. So let's say understand the purpose of access tokens and how these are issued in an OAuth 2 system. Then I would say know the roles involved in an OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect system. And I would have to I would add a third point, but I'm not actually sure if it would be better understand the purpose of the roles and make it something like get how, and then I can't use this anymore. I need to use again I need to say what I refer to. So I would say how tokens are issued, and then I would say how tokens are issued and validated in an OAuth 2 system. And so theoretically I should have Grammarly and it should help me. So let me open it, because for me it makes a lot of sense to use something like Grammarly, because I'm not a native speaker, I'm not an English native speaker, and it's difficult to get everything. But sometimes Grammarly doesn't work as what I would expect it to work. So yeah, better like this. I will maybe take it out later and then need when I need the help. Now I can't see it anymore. So this is what happens if you try to. Okay, I will try. I don't know. Good. So then I would actually prefer to start with the chapter or the title sections, the section titles. So let me see what I have suggested in my first proposal for this chapter 13 in the detail table of contents, and maybe I can start from there. So my suggestion first was. So the big picture of OAuth and OpenID Connect. I'll start with the description of the big picture. Why is that needed? How did we end up working on this? So I think, yes, I think that actually makes sense, isn't it? So let's put this as the first section. Okay. And then the next one would be obtaining tokens through various grant types. So I think that's good. In the end, obtaining tokens is something we need to discuss. However, I feel that if I already go to obtaining tokens before discussing what tokens are, it doesn't really make sense. So I'm not sure if I will be able to discuss what tokens are here in the big picture, or I would need to add one more section between, because I think that I can mention tokens here, but I don't think that I will be able to discuss tokens, because if I would have to discuss tokens, then I need to explain that tokens are of several types, that they are classified in opaque and non-opaque. I would have to discuss about the JVT, which is a token implementation. It's a lot of confusion out there according to what JVT is. I mean, there are actually a lot of people thinking that JVT is a kind of authentication. No, JVT is a kind of token. It's a token implementation. You can have several ways in which you make all your authentication using JVT, and those are the grant types. So it's a lot of confusion there with what JVT is, because there are a lot of poorly described articles. Honestly, if you search on the internet and on YouTube, you will find a lot of poorly explained, like things, I would say, even wrongly explained about JVT, and that's why I feel that I would need to actually add one more section here saying using tokens or implementing tokens, or okay, we can figure out later if it's not necessarily that this is the title that will stay fixed. So I can just say for the moment implementing tokens, but it's not right. I know I don't have a thing it's right literally implementing, because you don't implement them, you use some implementations, or I can say using various token implementations. I think that's even better. Okay, and then going back here, we have obtaining tokens through various grant types. So this is where we discuss the grant types that I will need to apply them. So when I discuss in the next chapter the implementation of the authorization server, I need to apply this. So let me describe, and then most likely I will describe each essential grant type one by one. So we can add it here, and there will be subsections of 13.3. So I'm gonna remove this part that I have copied, and then getting a token using the authorization code grant type, applying Pixie, getting a token with the client credentials using refresh tokens, and it will be 1, 2, 3, and 4 subsections. And then I can go over, like, this will be a very short section where I discuss also that OAuth 2 is not like some silver bullet, meaning that if you don't implement it correctly, you might have vulnerabilities introduced, because people forget about that, and sometimes they think that everything comes out of the box. And of course, at the very end, I will have a short summary section. So here it is. So I think we drew the big picture of what this chapter will look like. So we can now even start. And going here, body. Okay. And I will start with a chapter introduction. So what should I say? Sometimes I prefer to simply go into the description directly. In other cases, like in this one, I would actually prefer to start with the purpose. And for this specific chapter, I think starting with a supposition would be the best approach. So I would just put the reader in a specific scenario, so that they realize why, in the end, OAuth 2 is a solution for that specific scenario. So I'd say, suppose you work in a large organization. And the funny thing is that generally, probably readers will actually work in a large organization, maybe even if it's not large, like it's a medium organization, they will still face this scenario. So let's say, suppose you work in a large organization and you have to use several tools for your day-to-day work. You use bug tracker, apps, apps for documenting your work, apps for registering your time, and so on. So developers, architects, and so on, they do use a lot of applications throughout their work, and then of course they need to authenticate. You need to authenticate in each and every one of these tools to work with them. Okay, I have a small spelling mistake here. I still don't understand why my Grammarly doesn't work. I will have to figure that out, see why it's not working. So usually, oh, okay, now it started working finally. Okay, so you can see if that actually suggests me something. So suppose you work in a large organization and have to use several tools for your daily work. Sounds better. I agree. So what else do I have here as a suggestion? No, I prefer, and so on. Sorry, so not etc. And I think in each and every, let's say it's redundant, but it's kind of a day-to-day way we use it. So I think it's still better if we keep it like this. Fine. So I just put it in the scenario, and what should I do? What should I do now? So you need to authenticate. Would you use different set of credentials for these apps? Of course, using different set of credentials could work, but this approach would be cumbersome. As it's clear that different sets of credentials, Okay. 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 Cool. So using different we could work, but it would be cumbersome. So you would actually need to like remember and use the proper credentials for each tool, or you would simply have the same set of credentials, but you would have to put them in each and every application each and every time you use them. So that means it's first of all difficult for you, clearly, but then it's also difficult for the applications, because those who would have built the applications, then they have to maintain the set of credentials as well, and maintaining credentials which are secure set of data is difficult. So that's basically it. Mention the advantages of all that. That's basically what I'm doing, but I can't simply just say the advantages of OAuth 2 are this and that, because if you say that, and people who don't know what OAuth 2 is, they will have no idea what I'm discussing about. So I'm now basically making the reader understand where they are, and I don't want to even tell them the advantages. I want them to realize the advantages themselves throughout the story. Why is that? Because if you, first of all, read something or watch a movie, a documentary, you build a puzzle, it's that feeling of accomplishment when you discover yourself something from an explanation rather than having to be told directly. So that makes usually the book easier to read. And secondly, it sticks much better. So you remember it much better when you discover it yourself rather than when you read it. Think about things in the past where this happened to you. You will see that psychologically we are built to remember easier the things we discovered ourselves than the things we were told directly. Sometimes you might be sometimes you might be told different things like repeatedly and don't remember them, but when you discover it yourself, it sticks. So that's why the approach in which you write the book should be in a way in which it helps the reader the most. So that's what I'm trying to build here. Of course, remember what I said at the beginning of the video, this can change throughout the process, so it's not like this will remain the same. I have some specialists, the editors, who will take this and tell me if maybe I have overwhelmed with some specific approach and stuff like that, but I will see that later. So I'm just now building the first draft. So of course different sets of credentials could work, but this approach is cumbersome for the user, you, and would complicate also the purpose of the apps you work with. For you, the complexity comes from the fact that you'd have to remember and log in several times. Remember what? Remember the credentials, and log in several times in each of the app you use. For the apps, the added complexity comes from the fact that they also need to implement the responsibility, or maybe we can use this in the capability of persisting and protecting the credentials and the actual login. Oh, crazy! This is crazy. I'm sure it's that. Good. So now see, I have more suggestions from Grammarly. So which are my suggestions from Grammarly? I know that it's not underlining correctly, and I did find at some point a workaround for this, something with more monitors, but I'm not sure where it is actually now, because it's a little bit so. Writing preferences. So now what I'm doing, I'm trying to like change this to use descriptive. I'm not sure exactly where can I change my. No, anyway, I will check it out later. No idea. So it was something to get over this bug where the underline is not done correctly. I forgot. Okay, so I don't want to put and so on. We discussed that already. It also complicates. Each of the apps you use, of course, it's a plural there. This is wrongly spelled. Okay, cool. So for the apps, the added complexity comes from the fact that they also need to implement and predict. And then I say, what about having the responsibility for storing the credentials and protecting and authentication in a separate app. In this case, the user or the users will have to only log in once and use all the apps or their apps maybe without bothering to authenticate repeatedly. So this is one of the main advantages of implementing the authentication over the OAuth 2 phrase specification. I avoid using framework because OAuth 2 is a specification framework. So it's a framework meaning that you can build over the specification. OpenID Connect is built over the OAuth 2 framework, but OAuth 2 is not an implementation either, it's a specification. So when you build the application, you make it fulfill the rules that OAuth 2 describe. So that's I think that two things that create a lot of confusion throughout many developers is that they don't understand how can OAuth 2 be both a framework and the specification at the same time. So it's a specification. OAuth 2 is not an implementation. A system implementing OAuth 2 means that it fulfills all the rules that OAuth 2 imply. So it has the role of an authorization server. It uses one of the grant types the way it's described in OAuth 2. And so on and so forth. It has then the resource server works together with the authorization server in the way OAuth describes, so that it's a description of how things should work. But at the same time, it's a framework, meaning that you can enhance the specification. So for example, instead of using OAuth 2, which is very flexible, you might want to make things a little bit more rigid. And that's what OpenID Connect does. OpenID Connect is not a specification, it's a protocol. The difference between a protocol and the specification is that the protocol is rigid. It gives specific, clear rules on how to implement stuff. So OpenID Connect is based on OAuth 2, but implies specific rules. When an app implements directly things over OAuth 2, they might make it like more relaxed. But when they implement the protocol, the OpenID Connect protocol, then they fulfill precisely all the rules that the OpenID Connect protocol describe. So it will be more rigid in these terms. It's exactly like the difference between REST and SOAP. For those of you developers who might have implemented several ways of communication between applications, you might have heard about REST APIs, which are very common today. But if you are like old enough, or maybe work with old enough applications, you might have also used SOAP. So SOAP is a protocol. That P at the end of SOAP is from protocol, while REST is a specification. So when you use SOAP, you have very clear rules in how you describe your contract. You can't use something else than XML, and the XML you work with, it's implemented in a specific envelope. So you write it in a specific way. You can't go too much abroad the way it's specified. It's rigid. That's a protocol. While REST, well, when you define REST endpoints, you can have the data represented as JSON or as XML or as plain text, or you can have binary. So you can have all the flexibility you need. So you'd say that's the difference. Sometimes developers need to have something more rigid, like a protocol. Sometimes it needs to be more flexible. So one analogy can be between protocol and specification can be the sockets around the world. The electrical sockets, the electrical outlets. It's clear that we have different ways in which we need to have we need different adapters when we go throughout different places of the world. No, it's like the sockets in UK don't look the same as the sockets in the rest of Europe, and they don't look like the same like the ones in China, and they don't look the same like the ones in the US, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure how many different types of sockets there are, but I think we are, every one of us, aware that there are several ways of how the sockets look like. Now, the specification is clear. Always the socket will either have 2 or 3 wires, will either output 230 volts or 110 volts, and you will always have like one wire for the current, one null, and one grounding, and the grounding might be missing. That's the specification. All the sockets in the world work like that. So it doesn't matter if they are from the UK or from the US. If I put these three points, you will see that they are fulfilled. So that's a socket specification. But they are not over the same protocol. The protocol is the shape in which the socket has been built, and that's different in the UK, different in Europe, different in China, different in the US, and so on and so forth. So that's basically it. So hi guys, I see your messages. Some of them which are not related to stream, I will answer them later, like the books and stuff like that. And also I'm saying hi, so thank you very much for being here with me. So let me see. While I was here with the introduction, so it's basically Rapid pattern replicate. One of the main advantages of implementing the application over the OAuth specification. The second thing is that we can go even bigger. An app that can be used by, I would say, public users who are outside of an organization, like the users out there on the internet, by public users. I'm not sure if this is the right way to describe it. Maybe you can help me. If not, I will have some questions to the editors how I can express that. And so an app that can be used by public users, we use outside of an organization, and you want to allow them to use credentials that they already have, because the problem is that many big applications already implement authentication. So you have a GitHub account, you have a Facebook account, you have a Twitter account, you have N accounts, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. How can you avoid on your small application asking the user to create one more account? Because if you do that, it's already that they have many accounts, and to be honest, for me it's already difficult to remember all the sets of credentials I have. Secondly, you need to protect them right, and it's much more difficult to assure the user's protection in a small application you create rather than the way they are already implemented by YouTube, Twitter, and so on, where you have multi-factor authentication out of the box, where you have a lot of secure ways, and the users feel more confident with these applications. Honestly, do you feel confident of usually registering your or creating an account in each and every application? Maybe it depends, because if it's my fitness application and the only thing that someone can steal is my email address and how many minutes I've ran today, I don't really give a shit. I don't really care about it. But if you have more sensitive data, maybe you don't want to have someone being able to access it easily, and maybe and I know that even that some people reuse credentials. I don't recommend to do that, of course, but if you reuse credentials and you don't know where you reuse them in applications that are maybe not secure, and then those credentials get stolen somehow. It's not only that someone having that credentials will give them access to that application, but they will give them access to all the other applications that that you have where you have registered with the same set of credentials. So another can be used by public users, an app that you create for the world. Let's say, even it like this. Might also need authentication capabilities. You can implement, the app can implement those capabilities, but first, I would even use some bullet points because it's easier here. So list bullet points. It's more work to do. In this way. Secondly, the users would need a specific set of credentials for this app of yours. Thirdly, the users sometimes don't trust creating specific credentials for any small app they use. So it's a burden for the user, it's more costly for the application. Could you maybe allow the users of this app to log in with some credentials they already have? Could your users don't understand why it's this. Could your app's users log in with their Facebook, GitHub, Twitter, Google account credentials? Maybe. So you can completely get rid of having a capability implemented in your application. First of all, that reduce costs, that reduce security risks, and also avoid trust issues of your users. If you allow them log in with some credentials they already have, they don't need to remember a new set of credentials, they don't need to figure out if they trust or not your application, because they will not have any kind of credentials stored by that application, and you will not have to lose time implementing authentication because you will just reuse everything that has been implemented by a third party. And you've seen that a lot. You've seen that applications today usually offer more possibilities to the users. See, they can sign up with like 3 or 4 different third parties, and you can choose. I would like to sign up with Twitter, or I would like to sign up with LinkedIn, or with YouTube, and it's actually Google with Google, and so on. So yeah, I would even say that. I would say this: you might have already seen that all over the place. Apps around the web allowing users to choose to sign up and use a variety of social media platforms. This way, an app allows their users to use to authenticate with the set of credentials they already have, and without you needing to, I would say, implement something specific in your app. Such an approach reduce costs, and maintaining avoid user trust issues. And help user minimize the number of credentials they have, so how many username and passwords they have. I feel that I have a lot, so okay, passive voice. Usually people don't like passive voice. Well, that's why Grammarly usually instructs me when I use passive voice to change it to an active voice. Different commas probably that I forgot and so on. Okay, so I will take them. I will even close it for the moment and I will take it later. Minimize. Maybe it sounds better. The number of credentials they use. And then I will just say OAuth 2 is a specification that tells one how to implement authentication, how to separate the authentication responsibilities in a system. This way, multiple apps can use one other that implements the authentication, helping the user to authenticate faster, keeping their details more secure because they are in one place. So if it's only in one place, it's easier to secure than have you just spread them in multiple places. Okay, if you put them in multiple places, the probability that one of those places will be hacked is larger than if you have them in only one place. And then and of course minimize the costs of implementation in the apps. Okay, I will revise that. And then I would say in this chapter, and I try to make a map on what we will discuss throughout the whole chapter. So I would say I'm starting with the main responsibilities of OAuth 2. So people first need to know, when I will refer to an authorization server, what exactly that is. Just a lot of typos. So when they hear about resource server, what that is, the client, they need to know what a token is. They need to know that tokens can be. So that's what I'm going to say in section 13.1, and then we discuss the tokens, we discuss the grant types, and then we discuss the possible pitfalls. I would say we'll start with a section where I'll introduce the main actors involved in system where the authentication and authorization are built over the OAuth 2. And I say we start with section. I said with section, actually you can just say with section 13.1, where ends the main actors. In section 13.1, you'll learn all the responsibilities which are part of an OAuth 2 system. Such as the user, the client, the authorization server, and the resource server. In section 13.2 we'll discuss tokens, which are access keys, which are like access keys for an app. You'll learn there are more types of tokens, and when it's best to use each. In section 13.3 I'll go through the most important ways in which tokens can be issued. Which will test, which will implement and test later in chapter 14. Chapter 14 is the one where I'm discussing the authorization server. So that's basically where I will implement an authorization server. So I will implement the grant types, and I will have to somehow go at least through the most essential grant types. So that's basically it. And then we'll end the chapter with section 13.4, where we'll also go through where we'll go through possible pitfalls you need to consider when using OAuth, when implementing OAuth. Okay, so why don't I use LaTeX? Because I have not a lot of equations in this book. So LaTeX is excellent usually if you have formulas, equations, stuff like that. I'm writing a book about Java, so that's boring enough to not have a lot of equations. So LaTeX doesn't really make sense in this case. Since I only have to write paragraphs and put some pictures in, that's something you can do in any kind of word processor without having to complicate your life. I imagine that in the end, this is anyway taken and then put in special software by the ones who create the pages. So why should I invest a lot of time like writing with LaTeX, formatting myself stuff, when they will anyway be copy-pasted and reformatted again by someone else in a different software? Doesn't really make sense, no? Okay, cool. So I will go later again with a fresh mind through everything that I wrote, but now this is just the introduction. And as you can see, guys, because people ask me about how easy it is to write books, so I have spent like 1 hour already, and the only thing I managed to write is a couple of pages and define a bare structure of one chapter. And a lot of people ask me why it takes like a year and even more sometimes or so to write a book. Is because basically writing books is not that easy as it looks at at the very beginning. So, and that, again, I didn't even go through all the spelling mistakes yet, and that's only the first draft without all that represents afterwards: the reviews, the editor reviews, the feedback, the reviewers for different parts, and so on and so forth. So it takes a lot of time. Yes, it's not as easy as it looks. Yeah, and let's say that this is the chapter introduction. So I don't want to like go through all the details in the beginning. Usually being iterative, if one of my advice for you, and that's even when you write code, it's much easier to write something and then leave it like that, and then take a break, sometimes some hours, sometimes a couple of days, and then come back later and reiterate over what you wrote. Even code. So when you write code in your applications, because people ask me for tricks about clean coding sometimes. How can you write your code clean? And I'm telling them it's usually, of course, we know some principles, we know some patterns today, some anti-patterns, we know about code smells, so we know what to avoid. But in many cases, it's difficult to like just out of the box put them from the beginning, because our mind is made to in such a way in which it's much easier when you think in iterations. So instead of now going back and reading, because my mind already works in a way now, I will probably not have excellent ideas, much more different ideas, if I'm just going now back through the introduction. But if I'm going back tomorrow, if tomorrow morning I do the same thing and I go back through what I wrote, I will think a bit differently. I will maybe see things that I didn't see today. So I apply these kinds of iterations, and that's good in writing books anyway, because as I told you, I usually cannot focus for more than 3 hours. If I'm very lucky in a day, maybe 4 hours. Usually Saturdays and Sundays, when I'm a little bit less tired than when I'm during evenings after work, I can spend more than like 3 hours, maybe even 4, for writing. But it anyway doesn't make sense, because writing is not something like you can do like 8 hours a day and you wrote a chapter. If you want to write a chapter, say you need like 20 hours, the chapter will be better if you write it 2 hours a day than if you try to spend like 2 days in a row doing only that. I don't think it's even possible. So yeah, let me actually do something, because I feel that I'm a lot, my back hurts, and I'm just gonna stand a little. Okay, and let's start with section 1. So the big pictures. That's what I want to tell the reviewers about, the readers about the responsibilities. So one of the things I need here is a picture. So let me show you what I'm usually doing to build the visuals, because I'm a very poor guy in what concerns the artistics and visuals. For all the drawings in my books, I have a friend who draws them. For all the visuals that I need to do myself, because I can't have someone like doing them, what I do is I use Inkscape, which is a very simple tool, and I grab things from Flaticon, where Manning has an account, and I have the copyright permissions to use these icons anywhere in my books. And so let me show you how I'm doing that. I will just start with a first visual where I want to simply present the actors. Visuals are excellent tools. The more visuals you use, the easier is to create the mental model of what you want to describe there. In my case, authentication with OAuth 2. So that's why in this first chapter, what I want to do is first, I will write something, of course, in the introduction. But before I write something, I want to visualize it myself. That's another trick. Theoretically, you say, yeah, but don't you have it already in your mind? I do have it, but it's a lot better if I see it myself. So I want to now create a visual showing the responsibilities, and then I will start the chapter introduction myself. So I will do something like that. So what I'm doing, I'm going to graphics. I will create a new folder for my chapter 13, and I have a specific maximum maximum size for my visuals. So I instead of having to see which they are and recreate them, I'm just going to copy one of the previous chapters and reuse it. Okay, so I'm just saying chapter 13:01, and I will open with Inkscape. Very simple, free visual editor. It gives you vectorial. It has some bugs. It's fine, but what I'm doing here is still fine. And anyway, I know that the publishing house has a department for visuals. They will anyway take the vectorials I give them, and they will arrange it at the end. So I don't need to make it like perfect. I just need to make it enough good so that someone who is non-technical understands what I wanted there. So put the arrows in the right directions and stuff like that. If I do that, then everyone is happy. So even the visuals will be again taken by someone else, and they will be reused, but they will be recreated, not recreated, but refreshed somehow, and that's it. Good. So I need the user. So let me find something. If I write users, what do I get here on flat icon? So I was thinking to get this guy, but I reused it in one book, and someone told me that he's ugly because he doesn't have eyes. So user. Can I find something with eyes? Maybe if I use, I can take her. Like, she looks like a user. Okay. Okay. So let's say this is my user for this chapter. And then I need to figure out a way in which I get the authorization server defined and the resource server. So let me start with searching for server. See if I can find something. And the only problem is that I find something. I think this one with the shield looks like the resource server, because the resource server is the backend actually. And then I will do something more. I will just put also an R, like an R near it, to make it clear what the resource server is. Okay. So I can do like I'm taking the text like from here, write a big R. Like this. And put it somewhere. and then I need a different server, which will be the authorization server, and I also need a client. Now the client, I can represent the client either with a mobile app, with a browser, but in the end, even the client might be a server, so it can be any application. Now I don't want to push a lot of details from the very beginning to the readers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just like put a web app, and then in the book I will either in a separate graphic or in separate visual, or simply just in the paragraphs mention that the client is any kind of application, that usually you will find it represented as a web app or a mobile app, but it can even be a desktop application, or it can be even a server. And when I will discuss the client credentials grant type, that is usually grant type used when the things go between the applications, you will see that it can be even a server that takes the role of a client, isn't it? So let's say that this is my resource server. I was looking at the authorization. I was looking at this one. It has a database, because I'm pretty sure people will ask me, doesn't it usually has a database? Usually yes, but then it could create confusion, because if this one doesn't have a database, well, you can't know. The backend might have or not database. So let's try not to complicate things a lot. So just put them without databases for now, and there will come a time later when we do the implementation, when I will write about the implementation itself, then it's more than enough. Then I can just copy this R here and hey Japan, good to hear that I'm broadcasting so far away. By the way, for those of you who don't know, my troubleshooting Java will also be published in Japanese and Korean, if I'm not wrong. So soon there will be a release in these languages. I was very happy to hear something like this. So I really hope that I will at some point be able to visit Japan, as well as many other countries in Asia. I'm looking forward to seeing Tokyo for a long time, but the pandemics, they simply stopped me being able to do that. And I need a web app. Let's see what we find in terms of web app. This looks more like a mobile app. I'm writing web app, and then it gives me mobile applications. Okay, if that's not working, I can just try to find something related to a browser. Maybe this one, browser app. They are not clear enough for me. If I choose this one, like, it's very ugly, it's very, very simplistic. Maybe this one, like, it looks a little bit more colorful and it looks like a browser. I'm not convinced, but I don't want to spend like too much time just looking for these icons. We might change them later, say if I find something better. And one thing I don't like about my user is that it's not in front of a computer. I would prefer them to be in front of the computer, but anyway, I think it's much better like this anyway, because I want to have a separation between the browser, be clear that the browser is the client and the user is the human being somehow using the browser. Of course, the client is actually the app running in the browser. So I think for this purpose it looks much better in this case. So let's just keep them like this. So what should I do here? I'm just adding some annotations, and here is the user dot represents is the person using a certain application. And I think that's basically enough. And then we have the client. The user usually works directly with the client app. Okay, so the user uses a client app. The client app is an application that can I say it in the end, it's sometimes the client, I think, is one of the most difficult responsibilities to explain in OAuth 2, because you see the client, they might be used by a user or maybe not. I mean, it's not mandatory that the client is used by a user. We have grant types where this doesn't happen. The client, however, what always happens is that they work with a backend application. So I can say the client app, an application that uses a backend to retrieve or work with specific data and capabilities. So I think that's a good definition, because it doesn't really matter what kind of client you have. You might have a web app, you might have a mobile app, you might have a different server. It will always, otherwise it's not a client, no? It always is the client consuming some capabilities, or either calling some action, either working with data. So I think this sounds like a good definition. The client, I can even mention, it can be a web app, a mobile app, or even another backend application. Now, I'm using the term backend application considering the books reader will know what backend and frontend is, because I don't think that you can end up reading Spring Security in action without knowing the difference between frontend and backend. You always need to have some prerequisites. You can't simply just teach everything in a book. It doesn't work like that. So in this case, I can assume that this happens, that the readers know about backend and frontend. What I'm usually doing is also I'm putting arrows from text from the annotation to some specific part, like that. So this is my client. And then we have the authorization server. I think we should think about how they are read. I don't think I did it right. Sorry, I don't think this is the right. So I think the reader will, I will consider they read the book left to right, okay? Because in most places of the world, people read from left to right. I know there are exceptions, but usually when you think about a material, you do consider the left to right rule. So I will have, it's also meaning a thing that you need to think left to right and top to bottom, left to right and top to bottom. So it should be preferably when you read, the information should flow from left to right and top to bottom, not from bottom to top. So you don't put number 1 here, number 2 above. Okay, you have 1, 2. 1, 2. It's not 1, 2. Okay, it's always in the right. It should be in the right direction. And what I'm going to do here is that I'm going actually to align these 3. And I might want to like put this below. I think it's still good here. And then you have the client application. And then if I put this in line here, what I want to get in the end is that this is the backend, and you see this is a normal old school, I would call it, it's an old school user client, user front and backend system. I want to make it very explicit that this is just a responsibility taken out, which is I took out from the backend the authentication responsibility and I put it out. What would be the prerequisites for learning Spring Security? Good question. So what I consider for this book is that the reader has at least the Spring fundamentals and some basic Java knowledge. What I mean Spring fundamentals is mainly what you find in the Spring Start Here book, the book I wrote. I have it somewhere here. Okay, so at least what's here. I do also expect that they have some basics in Java, so they understand the Java language, because the examples are in Java. So of course I could have made them in Kotlin, but I chose Java because it's wider. And I assume also that they have at least some basics of SQL, at least understand some simple queries, select, insert, delete, update. I sometimes use them throughout the book's content. I think that's enough, because if anything else, like you can like read in parallel, you don't have to be an expert in cryptography to understand, like to have a bare idea or understand the bare idea of what cryptography is if you don't know it, and you can then read it in parallel with the book. So that's what I consider as prerequisites. Now, is this the right way? Well, don't know. I'm not totally sure. I'm a human. I make mistakes, and I'm aware of that. But it seemed to have worked, at least for the previous edition of the book. So I think I will keep that, since it worked. I will keep it the way it used to work. People didn't complain about that. So let's say the user, then I have the client annotation, then I have the backend annotation. Okay. I'm not really sure where I will add the authorization server annotation, to be So let me try to do it this way. So the resource server is actually the backend app that that the client uses. The client, and I think it's actually even enough. The resource server is just a backend application, and if you are aware about front-end and backend separation, then that should be enough. So fortunately for me, this is quite simple. I think I will actually put this a little bit closer, one to the other. One, two, three, four. So I have to be very careful with the way I put the annotations, because if I don't put them naturally for reading, then the editors will not be happy, and it's basically not the editors that matter that much, but the readers will not be happy. So this is my user, and one of the things I'd like to actually do for this kind of annotations is just write 1, 2, 3, and definitely we'll have a 4, which I can put it right here. The authorization server is the component that implements the authentication and keeps the user credentials and details secure. Okay. Okay, so let me see now. I can actually even put that a little bit lower. Free coupon for Spring Start here. At the moment, no, I don't have one. So I have 2 more free vouchers that I will share for Spring Security in Action 2nd edition on this stream. And since you have asked, once I finish this diagram, I will share the second on the chat. Of course, only one of you guys will be able to use it. But stay close on this channel, because every time I get free coupons from the publishing house, I put them here, so you will see me very often, and not only for my books, sharing with you guys coupons, free vouchers, and discount vouchers as well. So if you started the notifications, oh, see, that's a problem. If you started the notifications, then you will find that. So how do we do here? Because I don't have a lot of options, so I think I will actually have to do it like this, which is not what I do, because it's actually it's not okay. It's not okay because it's exactly it's counterclockwise. It's not considered not intuitive, you know. it should either be on columns or stuff like that. So counterclockwise is something that they don't like. So how can we make this clockwise? Because I think the only way I can make it clockwise is reversing these two, the authorization and the resource server. So putting this and then the authorization server. Then it's still not okay, because in the next sections, you see the authorization server is the first one to be called, so it makes sense to be here. Like this is the user, the client calls the authorization server and then the resource server, so it's not really like goes down and then up, so it should still be here somehow. I think I had this problem in the previous edition as well, and I ended up putting it counterclockwise at that time. One thing I can do, actually, can try to put the client here, move this a little bit upper so that they don't, and then I can have this here, and then I have this, so it's more like on column 1, 2, 3, 4, so more intuitive like this. Okay, I think it makes more sense. Okay, I will see what the editors tell me and help me later, but I think this at least is not counterclockwise, because counterclockwise is an anti-pattern in writing, so you should avoid creating figures that read counterclockwise. Avoid them to be read from right to left, from bottom to top, and avoid them to be counterclockwise. So now it's not counterclockwise anymore. And then I also need the relationships between this, because I've only put here the responsibilities, but I have no relationship between them. So let me add the relationships as some arrows. So one of them would be like this, a little bit more thick, and I prefer using a different arrow. Same here. Okay, with different arrow. And one more. And if we want to be really precise, actually, theoretically it's not only one way. So I could have drawn the reverse as well, but I think it overcomplicates the things if I use the reverse. So let me keep it like this for the moment. The only thing I will add as well, so as I say, just the user uses and then asks for token. Oh, sorry. And then the resource, then the client also then calls the resource server. Actually, the ask for token, we can avoid that for the moment. We can just say calls the authorization server. So the user uses the client, which calls the authorization server and the resource server. So I think for the moment that's enough. Okay, and then I think we can see if this figure covers all the responsibilities well. I miss one thing. Oh, the resource server arrow is wrong. The resource server arrow should be like this. Okay. Then the client arrow should be like this. And then we have the resource server, so it's here, 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 here. And read once more the annotation. So I'd say the user, the person using a certain, so the user is the person using a certain application. The users usually work directly with the client app. The client app, an application that, if I said here is, I think here I should say as well. So maybe let's do it like this. So say the user column, the person using a certain application. The users usually work directly with the client app. The client app column, an application that uses a backend to retrieve or work with specific data and capabilities. The client can be a web app, a mobile app, and in US notation it's a comma here, or even another backend application. The resource server, and then I can cut this completely and say the backend app that the client uses. I say calls because otherwise it doesn't make sense with the arrow. And the authorization server column, and then again start directly with the component that implements the authentication capability and keeps the user's credentials and details secure. And I think now it kind of makes sense for a first draft. So I can export it to chapter 13. Uh, 01. Okay, and now going back to my chapter, I say I need to add a figure, insert the figure and then this will be figure 13.1. Whew, difficult. So I have one more code for you guys. So in the chat here, first of you who will use it gets a free copy of the second edition Spring Security in Action ebook. It only works for the ebook, it only works one time. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Not sure why I see it's so large on the left. I can now actually write the figure caption because that should be easy for this one, and then I'm starting with the chapter introduction and see what should I basically the text, the part of the things that are easily reflected through the visual. They should also be in the text described and eventually described in more details. And that will be basically section 13.1. Okay, So in this section we discuss the responsibilities that interact with one another in an OAuth 2 system. We'll also talk about what OAuth 2 is as a specification and what is the difference between OpenID Connect and a protocol, and OAuth 2 specification it relies on. I consider essential to understand well the concepts behind the scenes of this authentication and authorization approach before diving into its implementation in chapters 14 through 16. I think it is. Behind the scene. I think I can now go directly to the figure, and I said that I will write the caption as well. So the actors of an OAuth 2 OpenID Connect system. The user uses a client which needs to get authorized for specific actions. On a backend service. Which we call a resource server. To get authorized by its backend, the client requests first to be authenticated by the authorization server. So I don't mention anything about tokens now because I have no token in the picture itself, and this figure is has the only purpose of putting in the same place all the possible actors of an OAuth 2 system. So I don't want to discuss now how does that happen. I want these figures to only be, these are the actors, and a very simplistic description on how they interact. Like in this case, user uses the client calls the authorization and the resource server. Okay, so that's what I want. I don't want to go into details. So I want from the caption from the figure to make sure that I have I make clear that we have users, we have clients, we have a backend which is called the resource server. Sometimes even this, the resource server, is considered like a difficult thing to understand, because the developers who start learning OAuth 2, they don't get from the very beginning that the resource server is basically just a backend application. It's the backend. If you have normal application like front end and backend, that backend is called the resource server. Okay, that's it. So content from first edition, is it still relevant and for what degree? So I've just bought your book in physical form. It will be a big difference between the first. So you bought actually this book, I guess. This is the first edition. And if there will be a big difference, well, there will be differences if you will follow my second playlist of Spring Security fundamentals that I started in 2022, and I'm still continuing it now. You will see that there are syntaxes that have changed, like there is no more web security configure adapter class that used to be extended. If you will read throughout this book, it uses the web security configure adapter because that's the way it was done like 2 or 3 years ago. Now, there are two things. Is it still useful? Yes, I will not disappoint you, fortunately. This is still useful. So the physical, if it's physical, only bought it. But if you will buy the second edition, you will get this also as a PDF, as an ebook. So you get both the second and the first edition. But the first edition you get as an ebook. And what I would recommend you, and maybe that could be disappointing a little bit for some, is that I would recommend you know both. So I would recommend you read both. And yes, that's 560 pages. The second one will probably be kind of the same, so it's about 1,000 pages, which is not easy to read because it's a lot of pages. But why I recommend that is because applications, not all of them are upgraded in time. So do you think you will still find a lot of applications using Spring Security the way you find it here? Well, in the next 5 years at least, I'm pretty sure you will. Okay. Also, to upgrade from one to another, you need to know both the way it looked like and the way it looks now. So the information from both editions is still relevant, yes. So no, you didn't lose like anything that you bought the first edition, because if you read it, well, you anyway need to know also what's in there. At least my estimation is for the next 5 years, and even more maybe, I don't know. I mean, you know, guys, you might also be developers same as I am, and you know that applications are not usually like upgraded all the time very often, because stakeholders pretty much very often don't understand that that should be part of a development lifecycle, and they say that they want to invest in business cases more, and then they figure out they have technical depth, but that's another story. So for you as developer, yes, I think it makes a lot of sense. And for those of you guys who will buy, for example, the second edition, you will get also the first edition as a PDF. So that's how it works with mining usually. So I hope that that clarifies your question, and yeah, let me know if it makes sense or not. Now I finished with the first figure, so I can now just go further and the concepts behind the scenes. So you can now I can refer to figure 1. Figure 13.1 presents main actors of an OAuth 2 system. mean an entity. How can I say that? Sometimes people get confused about what actors are. They say, I use the word actors, but it's not clear for me. So it's basically whoever plays a role. No, and by actor I mean any entity that plays a role in the system's functionality. Okay, I hope that's okay how I described it. With OAuth 2 system, you'll find the following actors. The client, the user, the user first, the user, then I will have to come with a description, the client, come with a description, the authorized, I will put first the resource server this time, the resource server, and the authorization server. So that will be it. So Spring Security version 5 up in 2nd edition. So in 2nd edition I actually discussed Spring Security 6, not 5. So for Spring Security 5 you have the 1st edition. Okay. Mean any entity plays role, okay, send the resource server. And then I have to shortly describe them, but I want to tell a little bit more than you find in the annotations of the figure here. So I'll have to say, for example, that the user doesn't always exist. There are cases where the user doesn't exist, and that we will probably discuss later when we discuss the grant types. So the user is the person, or simply without is the person that uses the application. The user usually works with a front-end application which we call a client. Okay. This front-end application may be a web app running in the browser, or should I say that later? Because I'm not the user, maybe I say that we call the client, I set the client, so I think it's enough here. And for this I can actually use a bold, okay, so I can say, you know, although I'm not sure if they allow me to bold this, but I will try. Meaning that they might not be happy that I'm bolding this. The editors might tell me that I should not bold here. I always feel that I need to bold this first part and then leave the explanation later unbolded. My mic is too low now, because earlier you told me it's too loud, so I'm not sure how to put it. I put it just a little bit louder, so I hope that makes sense now. Maybe it's because also I'm now standing and I'm sometimes far away from my mic, so maybe it's that. I will try to speak a little bit louder, and I also put the mic louder. Let me know if you still encounter issues with the mic and stuff like that. I can put it louder. So also front-end application which we call a client. Now I have to say the user doesn't always exist in an OAuth 2 system, as we'll discuss later in this chapter. Or I would say just we'll discuss in section using token characters, section 13.3.3. So section 13.3.3, where you'll learn about the client credentials grant type. Okay, good. So I think that's fine. Let's see what can we say about the client. The application that calls a backend and needs authentication and authorization. So the client is the application that needs to be authenticated and authorized against the backend. The backend in this case is the resource server. So, but the authentication, as we will see, is done at the authorization server, which I will write a little bit later. So the application that calls a backend and needs authentication and authorization. The client can be a web app, a mobile app, or even a desktop app, or a separate backend service. When the client is a backend service, it usually doesn't the system usually doesn't have a user actor. Then the resource server, a backend application that authorizes calls made or sent by one or more client applications. And then the authorization server, an app that implements authentication and storage of the user's credentials, or simply storage of credentials, as we'll see later that the client has also some credentials, so even the client authenticates somehow themselves. Okay, I'm not sure what to do about the sound more than this guy, so sorry for that. I will just leave it the way it is. Maybe it's the echo in my room, I don't know. So the app that implements authentication and storage of credentials. Should I say something more here than this? Maybe, maybe not. Storage of credentials in a safe way. Because I think that's one of the most important things, is that, well, storage of credentials, it's easy to implement, like you put them in a table in a database, isn't it? Not really, no. I mean, if you just treat credentials always like just normal data, then it might not really make a lot of sense. Credentials, the most important thing is that you need to keep them safe, okay? So that's the main point about them. So now what I will do is go back like this, and then I will just step one more over and discuss the process, because now I need to like make a perspective not only on the actors but also on the process itself. So for that I will need another diagram. No, I need to draw again somehow the issue of the tokens. Okay, so I'm just going to delete a part. Delete this part, delete this part, delete this part here. One more part to be deleted. Okay. And I should make now a little bit more clear what happens. So I think now it's the moment to put this a little bit more apart. And instead of having only the arrow forward, you have to have an arrow back as well. So like this. Okay, good. And then again. And because I don't have a lot of space to write a lot of things on the diagram, I will just put some numbers. So that's what I'm going to do, because I don't know otherwise what can I do. I will put some numbers, and I will just put them then in an ordered list in the book later, in the text. Okay. Good. And the text. So it's 1. And then the client needs a token, so this is 2. Oh, sorry for that. This is 2. And 3. So the client gets a token, and then the client sends a request to the backend, and then the client gets a response from the backend, and then the client shows the user whatever they wanted to see. So this is what we will describe now. The diagram is very similar, but now we focus on the process and not on the actors only. So I will put no, I think no annotations are necessary, but maybe it's still better if somehow I write here user and client, and then they have an A and an R. I think the authorization server and the resource server are quite clear who they are. Now going back to my document, it's time to fill in the figure, and then there's the second one. The most straightforward authentication process. So we just described it in the most straightforward way. I only think I don't have, and I think I want to correct this. I want to add here the token somehow. So here we discuss about tokens. You can't do things without a token. So I need to represent it somehow. So how do I represent a token? Maybe like an access card or like a key. Which are my options? No, I certainly don't want to use a coin for that. This key looks nice, like a token. I think it actually looks really good. Then I think I will need to add some annotation as well. So it's been already a couple of hours since I started the stream and working on the chapter, and I didn't even finish one section. Quite heavy process, isn't it? I would say just issues. Issues a token to the client. Maybe I can just say issues a token to the client. Okay, and then the client uses the token to authenticate, and call when sending a request to resource server to authenticate, when sending a request to the resource server, something like that. So I still see that some people didn't yet get bored, and you are still here with me, guys. Thank you very much for that. I mean, this is, as you can see, heavy work, isn't it? Imagine writing a book of 560 pages. Not that easy, isn't it? Okay. Good. So that's much better. Now I will re-export it. Okay. And add it again in my Word document. The most straightforward way to describe the authentication process. The client requests a token from the authorization server. And uses this token to authenticate and get authorized, or simply to get authorized, to not make confusion. So to get authorized when sending requests to the backend app resource servers. That's again one more bold fact that the resource server is just a fancy name you give to the backend application. So, again. Okay. So that's what we want to describe here. No, so now I would say let's now discuss about how the authentication and authorization really happen. In just a few words, the steps are simple. One, the user needs to execute a certain use case. With the client app. The client app needs to authenticate, needs to get authorized to call the backend and serve to serve the user's request. To get authorized, the client first requests a token called access token from the authorization server. The client uses the token the authorization server issued to get authorized when sending requests to its backend. Figure 8.2 details a bit the flow in a visual way. The numbered steps on the figure represent the following. Okay, now I have to first of all make sure this is a body, and secondly that this starts with 1. The user tries to use the client application to execute a certain use case. The client application knows it can't call its backend without having a token first that will allow it to get authorized. The client requests such an access token from the authorization server. 3. The authorization server issues a token and sends it to the client app. And I would say actually following the client app's request, the authorization server issues a token and sends it to the client app. I think it makes sense, isn't it? Four, the client uses the app to send requests to its backend, the resource server. The resource server authorizes the client's request if authorized, successfully. The resource server replies. The resource server executes the client's request and replies back. The client shows the user, shows the result to the user. Okay, I think it's pretty much clear the way I read it now. So now what? We introduced the idea of a token, and we can't finish this section 13.1 until we discuss everything from out of the big picture. So what is actually this token represented as the fancy key, whatever that is, fancy digital key on my visual? So we need to discuss the fact that the token is a unique piece of data that somehow allows the client to prove that they have been recognized, either them or the user or both, that they have been recognized by the authorization server, so that the resource server can authorize them. So if I would be a reader, probably now I would ask myself what this token is. I mean, okay, the process is clear, but what is actually this token that the client asks, and why does it ask for that token? I think that's the only piece of information that's missing from our process, because I described it somehow in few steps, and the only place where I've actually described somehow what the token is called the access token. So I didn't even say what the access token is. So maybe here is a point where I would have to say something at least like this token is just some specific information that helps the client to prove they were correctly identified, authenticated by the authorization server. Which make a little bit more sense, but now still, what is this token that the authorization server issues, or what exactly is this token that the authorization server issues? A token can be anything, can be any piece of data that allows the user, the client, to prove they and or the user have been identified by the authorization server. token is also a way to get more details about both user and client if needed. Since all the user and client details, credentials plus other specific details are, if I say are now managed, I'll use passive voice. Can I rephrase it? So since the authorization server now manages all the user and client details, and maybe I can get rid of this parenthesis and say the backend sometimes needs to get part of these details from the authorization server and use them. The backend will get such details through means of the token. Okay, so a string of characters that provides authorization information indicating that the bearer of the token has been granted access. I don't agree with your description, because for the specification, first of all, the token doesn't necessarily need to be a string of characters. It can be a string of bytes. So it can really be any piece of data. It doesn't need to be a string of characters. It doesn't need to be composed out of characters. Then the second one, that provides authorization information, is or not correct, depends on what would you read. Do you read it contains authorization information? Because if that's what someone reads, then it's not correct, because the token may be opaque. So if it's opaque, it doesn't contain any kind of information for authorization. If it's opaque, it only gives the backend access to retrieve such details from the authorization server using an introspection endpoint. So again, this part, the second part of your definition, that provides authorization information, might be put under doubt. Indicating that the bearer of the token has been granted access to a specific resource or server, through that information you get is then used by the resource server to see if the request is or not authorized. But because of your two, so in your definition, I wouldn't use it because of the first two things, a string of characters, which is not true necessarily. It can be any string of bytes actually. Well, now I know in today's real world examples, in most cases, probably in all of them, it's a string of characters, but according to the specification, that's not true. And then for that provides authorization information, I would have to say it provides it in a direct or indirect way, because otherwise someone might always expect that information is inside the token, and that only happens with non-opaque tokens such as JVTs, but it doesn't happen with opaque tokens. So when I write, I want to be as explicit possible, because otherwise people might get confused if they don't already know the subject. Now, if someone reads, like they don't and reads, they will understand probably any kind of way I explain. But the difficulty of putting the words is, how do you make it in such a way in which you make someone understand properly, but you don't introduce more confusion, or you don't put it in a way in which they understand it wrongly. So that's why I said a token can be any piece of data. So it can be a string of characters. I can actually add here. That's a good point. I can actually say this is usually a string of characters, think usually without this is in front, it doesn't make sense. So it's usually a string of characters that allows the client to prove they and or the user have been identified by the authorization server. The token is also a way to get more details about both users, or both user and client if needed. And then I say, why is that? Because since the authorization server now manages the user and client details, the backend sometimes needs to get part of these details from the authorization server and use them. The backend will get such details through the means of the token. Sometimes, and then now I will fill in and say, sometimes the token itself might, or without might, contains the details, the needed details, as you'll read in section 13.2. Such tokens are called non-opaque tokens. So sometimes the token itself contains the needed details. Otherwise, the backend needs to call the authorization server to get the data about the client and the user, and that's for opaque tokens. Okay. And I don't have to mention again the section 13.2 because it's clear it's section 13.2. And still feel like I'm missing something to clarify now. Proof silence when token, okay. That's the token. What's the token? You can say the process, or I may say OAuth 2 describes multiple flows in which a client might get a token. There is one more thing with opaque tokens. It's also the blackboarding approach, but that's something I described in the first edition of Spring Security in Action. But honestly, I don't think that it's something many systems implement today, and I don't think that I would even recommend it throughout my past experience. I don't think that blackboarding is an approach that makes sense in many cases. So maybe we can spare some pages and avoid discussing about blackboarding. Blackboarding is that approach where the authorization server and the resource server have a common database. So instead of when you have opaque tokens, instead of having the resource server calling the authorization server saying, hey, I want details about the user that for whom you issued this token, and that's called introspection. That's what usually happens with opaque tokens. Instead of introspection, they have a common database. And instead of asking the authorization server, the resource server simply goes to the database, sees where the tokens were stored and which are the user and client details directly in that common database. So both authorization server and the resource server, they share a common database. So that's why it's called blackboarding, because it's like they both write on the same blackboard. I think it has a lot of disadvantages, and maybe more disadvantages than advantages, the blackboarding approach. So I think we can skip this, and since in like 99.99% of the cases you'll either have JVT or introspection today, maybe doesn't really make a lot of sense to describe blackboarding anymore here. So we can completely skip over this detail that looks to me like unneeded at the moment. And then say, well, to discuss multiple flows in which a client might get a client. Might get because if the authentication is authorized, it won't. So might get a token. We call these flows grant types, and we discuss the most common grant types in section 13.3. Should token time limits be mentioned? This is a really interesting, it's a good point. So should we mention here also that the token is something that doesn't last forever? Or should we go with that directly when we discuss the token implementation? I think it makes sense to mention it in both places, isn't it? Because in the end, the fact that the token expires is important. But where could we put this? Sometimes I can just continue here. So I say also, unlike a physical key, an access token doesn't have an infinite or very large, doesn't have a very large lifespan. An access token is made to expire after a short period of time, after which the client needs to ask again for another token, to ask again the authorization server for another token. This way, a lost token, such as a lost key, can't be used inappropriately. And one thing that's missing from my 13.1 here is an analogy. It's an analogy with the real world. So I would like to make that analogy with going to the front desk of a building, proving yourself who you are using your ID, and then getting back an access card. The question is, from a learning point of view, where would this analogy stay better? At the end now, when we have already discussed everything? Or should I have actually from the beginning made the analogy? Because I've started with what OAuth 2 is, when we discuss it, in which chapters, which are the main actors. My feeling is that it stays better at the end, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe I mean it might work. It might work here instead. Like just here before 8.2. can say, but before going into more details, let's make an analogy to something closer to real life or something like that. Suppose you need to attend an interview of a large corporation. You have been called to their main headquarters for a face-to-face discussion. But the building in which this company is doesn't allow anyone to enter. There are specific protocols implemented for visitors. To get in the building and attend the discussion, you first need to visit the front desk and prove who you are using an ID. After getting identified, you'll get an access card from the front desk, and this access card will only allow you open certain doors. You might not even be able to use all the elevators, but only specific ones. The process of getting in the building for the discussion is very similar to how authentication and authorization work in an OAuth 2 implementation. You are the user who needs to implement, who needs to call a use case or to execute. For that, you use your credentials, the ID, to authenticate at the front desk. The authorization server. I might ask for a drawing for this process from my friend, because it would be nice to put it somewhere here. But now I don't have one. And as I have mentioned at the beginning, I am not really an artist, so yeah, that's it. Okay. Once you prove who you are provided with an access card, the token. But you can use this token only to access specific resources, like the elevators and specific doors. You can use the access card only for a short time period. After your discussion, you need to return the card at the front desk. Well, it makes sense, and if I can also have a figure somewhere here, so drawing of the process of going to the interview. Okay, then I think that's basically what I want. Okay. And now I can actually start discussing about various token implementations. And since we have two of them, I think it would actually make sense to have two subsections, like 13.2.1, 13.2.2. I have using opaque tokens and using non-opaque tokens. Something like this. And here is where I already have a small drawing that I would like to use, also made by my friend for the first edition. Is the one with Zglorb. So I like the one with Zglorb. This one. A little bit too big. I think it should be a little bit smaller. Okay, and this would be figure 13.3. Says glorp can only access specific doors with specific parts, specific areas of the mothership using their access card. Okay. So the glorp, the user to access the mothership resources. To do that, they are first authenticated by the authentication server, and they are given an access card token. Small can only access specific areas called resources of the mothership. Okay, fine. Say tokens are the access cards a client uses to send requests to get authorized when sending requests to backend. Tokens are an essential part of OAuth 2 authentication and authorization process. Since they are the entities, somehow I have to say, so since they are the entities used to exchange the data and prove the authenticity of the authentication, so that's very important. Of client and user authentication, but they are also the way a backend get more details about the client and the user. The token are like I already said, are like access cards. You can say here already, figure 13.3. In this section, we'll discuss we'll discuss how tokens are classified, and how, and depending on the token type, how are they used in the authorization process? Three hours since I started, I'm starting to feel a little bit tired. I've told you I usually don't resist more than 3 to 4 hours when I'm writing something, because it's more difficult than it appears. As you can see, so in 3 hours we managed like maybe to write, I don't know, like 20% of the chapter. In terms of pages is like 5 pages. A chapter might have 25 pages or around, even 30 sometimes, so it's basically just 20% of the chapter that I've managed to write in 3 hours. And of course I anyway need to iterate over it again and again, at least 2 to 3 times. So it takes time and effort, but in the end, like after 3 to 4 weeks, you have a complete draft. If you spend a total of probably 20-30 hours, something like that, you have a complete draft, and you can give it to editing. Okay, so we have token, we have glorp, and then we have the classification. I can say tokens. We classify tokens in, and then we have a list of 2, opaque, tokens which don't store data, and non-opaque, tokens which store data which is immediately available to the backend for use, usually with the purpose of implementing authorization. Opaque. So we classify tokens. We classify tokens based on the way they provide data for authorization. They provide the resource server the data for authorization. So we classify tokens based on the way they provide the resource server data for authorization. In opaque, tokens which don't store data to implement the authorization, the resource server usually needs to call the authorization server, provide the opaque token, and get the details. This process is called introspace. It's not a process. It's what is actually, it's just a call. This call is known as the introspection call. And then non-opaque, tokens which store data, making it, let's say, making it immediately available to the backend for use for the implementation of the authorization. The most known non-opaque token implementation is the JSON Web Token, JWT. Okay. Then I can discuss opaque and non-opaque tokens. And I can also start with a visual. I can have a visual for each of the subsections, which I then use for the description. But guys, to be honest with you, I don't think I can do that anymore now. So it's already 3 hours since we started and I've covered a big part. So I think I will conclude for now and continue later. For me, that is enough for today. Or at least not for today. Maybe I can do something later today, but at least for now I need a break. But thank you very much for being here with me. At the very end, I still have one more voucher for a free ebook copy, Spring Security in Action 2nd edition, the one that we are writing together now. So I want to share this last voucher with you and to say again thank you for being here. So I'm very happy to have seen you even for this, a lot of people, and to have the chance to get inspiration from you and from what you've written in the chat, guys. So I have a big thank you for that. And yeah, let's see if you liked it. Maybe we can create similar events in the future. If not, anyway, follow me on the channel because you have a lot of benefits. I kind of share knowledge all the time. I create playlists, videos, as you know, and I even share vouchers for free ebooks and discount codes. So stay with me. You will have things to learn. Until then, I need to get some rest, so I will just wave goodbye. I say thank you very much again and talk to you later. Cheers, guys.